Does God ever ask you to stay in a hard place for someone else's salvation? Have you ever found yourself stuck in a situation so hard, so painful, that you wonder why God doesn't just deliver you from it? You pray, you ask for relief, yet you stay right where you are, suffering. And in those moments, you begin to question, does God even care? What if the answer is far more profound than a simple yes or no? What if God is asking you to stay right there, not for your own sake, but for someone else's salvation? Imagine that your willingness to endure hardship could be the very key to unlocking someone's encounter with Christ. It's a truth that's hard to swallow, but life-changing once you embrace it. Could God be using your pain for a greater purpose? One that transcends your circumstances and leads someone else into the arms of grace? Stay with me, because today we're diving deep into why God sometimes calls us to stay in hard places for the sake of others, and how that decision can transform both you and the people around you in ways you never imagined. Life has a way of bringing us into difficult seasons, times when the weight of our circumstances feels unbearable. Maybe it's a painful relationship, an unfulfilling job, or a personal struggle that just won't seem to let up. In these moments, it's easy to wonder why God would allow us to stay in such a hard place. Why doesn't He just deliver us? Why doesn't He bring immediate relief or take us out of the pain? It's in these moments of desperation that God's voice often speaks the loudest, not in the promise of a quick escape, but in the invitation to stay. God sometimes calls us to endure hardship for reasons far beyond our understanding, and often it's not just for our own spiritual growth, but for the salvation of others. The truth is, God uses our struggles, our pain, and our patience to touch the lives of people around us in ways we may never fully comprehend. If you've ever faced a hard place and wondered what God was doing, you're not alone. In this video, I'm going to show you that the very place where you feel stuck might be the very place where God is doing His most powerful work, both in your life and in the lives of those around you. Through scripture and real-life examples, we'll explore how God's call to remain can sometimes be the key to someone else's salvation. This video is for anyone who has ever felt lost or unsure in a difficult season, and if that's you, I want you to know that God has a purpose even in the hardest of times. So make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned as we dive into the powerful, redemptive truth of staying in hard places for the sake of someone else's salvation. When we face hardship, it's easy to feel as though God has abandoned us or that our pain is meaningless. But the Bible shows us a different perspective, a perspective where God uses our struggles not just for our own growth, but as a means to bring others into His kingdom. Consider the story of Joseph in the Old Testament. His brothers, filled with jealousy, sold him into slavery, and he was taken to Egypt, where he endured years of hardship, betrayal, and false accusations. Yet, through every painful moment, Joseph remained faithful to God. In Genesis 45, when he finally revealed himself to his brothers, he said, "And now, do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." Joseph's years of suffering weren't in vain. God used his pain to save not only his family, but an entire nation during a time of famine. His willingness to endure hardship ultimately brought about salvation for many. This idea is echoed in the New Testament as well. In the book of Romans, Paul writes, "We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." In these verses, we see that no matter how painful or difficult our circumstances may be, God can work through them for His good purposes. Our suffering, as hard as it may seem, is never wasted. God is always at work behind the scenes, using our pain to shape us and to draw others to Him. This was certainly true for Paul and Silas, who found themselves in prison after being falsely accused. Instead of focusing on their unfair circumstances, they chose to worship God in the darkest moment of their lives. Their faithfulness led to the conversion of the jailer and his family. The story in Acts 16 reminds us that sometimes our hardships are the very things that open doors for others to experience the love and grace of God. God's call to remain in difficult places is not about passively enduring suffering. It's about choosing to stay faithful and trusting that He will use our obedience to accomplish something much bigger than we can imagine. It is through these hard places that God refines us and makes us vessels for His glory. When we remain in these places, we are part of something greater, something eternal. Every tear, every prayer, every act of faith in the midst of pain can be a catalyst for someone else's salvation. What seems like a place of despair can, in the hands of God, become a place of transformation, both for us and for those around us. To fully grasp the depth of God's call to stay in hard places, we need to look at it from a theological perspective. The idea of suffering for the sake of others isn't new to the Christian faith. Throughout church history, many theologians have grappled with this question. Why does God allow suffering, and what purpose does it serve? One of the most profound answers comes from the life of Jesus Christ, the ultimate example of suffering for the salvation of others. Jesus didn't come to avoid pain, he came to endure it for the sake of humanity. His life, death, and resurrection are the cornerstone of the Christian faith because through his suffering, he brought salvation to the world. In John 15:13, Jesus tells his disciples, "Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends." This verse is not just a theological statement, it's the foundation of the gospel itself. Christ's suffering was not for his own benefit, it was for ours. He stayed in the hardest place, on the cross, enduring the weight of humanity's sin, because he knew that his sacrifice would bring about the salvation of many. His call to us is to follow him in this way, to remain faithful in difficult circumstances, trusting that our own suffering can be used for a higher purpose. This concept of suffering for the sake of others isn't limited to Jesus. The Apostle Paul, in his letters, repeatedly speaks of the necessity of enduring hardship for the gospel's sake. In Colossians 1:24, Paul writes, "Now I rejoice in what I am suffering for you, and I fill up in my flesh what is still lacking in regard to Christ's afflictions, for the sake of his body, which is the church." Paul understood that his personal suffering was a means of advancing God's kingdom and bringing salvation to others. His willingness to endure imprisonment, persecution, and even the threat of death was not in vain. It was part of God's redemptive plan for the world. This idea is also present in the writings of early Christian thinkers. Augustine of Hippo, one of the church fathers, spoke often about the transformative power of suffering. In his writings, he noted that suffering was not a punishment from God, but a tool for spiritual refinement. He believed that God used suffering to draw people closer to him, to refine their character, and to make them more like Christ. Augustine's perspective invites us to see hardship as a means of sanctification, a process that molds us into instruments of God's grace for the world. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian who stood against the Nazi regime, also wrote about suffering as a way of participating in God's redemptive work. In his book, The Cost of Discipleship, Bonhoeffer speaks of the cost of following Christ, a cost that often involves suffering. He writes, "When Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die." Bonhoeffer understood that to follow Jesus was to walk in his footsteps, which meant enduring suffering for the sake of others. For Bonhoeffer, the call to stay in difficult situations wasn't just a matter of personal endurance, it was a call to join Christ in his mission to save the world. Theologically speaking, God's invitation to remain in hard places isn't arbitrary. It's rooted in the very nature of God's redemptive work in the world. God doesn't call us to suffer for suffering's sake. He calls us to suffer in order to bring about the salvation of others. Our willingness to endure, to stay faithful, and to trust in God's greater plan is a powerful testimony of his grace at work. This is the heart of the Christian message, that through suffering, God brings salvation, not just for us, but for those around us. When we stay, when we endure, we become a part of God's great story of redemption, and our lives, even in their most painful moments, can be used to bring others into the light of Christ. In today's world, it's easy to feel alone in the struggle, especially when we're called to remain in a difficult place for someone else's salvation. It's one thing to read about biblical heroes like Joseph or Paul, but it's another thing to live through the pain of staying in a place that feels hopeless. Many of us face situations where we feel like we're stuck, whether it's a relationship, a job, or a place in our own hearts, and wonder if there's any real purpose in it. Let me share with you the story of Rebecca, a woman who faced this exact struggle. Rebecca had been married for years to a man who showed little interest in God. Despite her best efforts to encourage him in faith, he remained distant, cold, and even hostile toward the gospel. She prayed for him every day, pouring out her heart to God, but nothing seemed to change. Her frustration grew. It felt like every prayer she uttered was met with silence. But in the quiet of her prayer time, God spoke to her in a still, small voice. "Stay. Stay in this relationship. Love him, serve him, pray for him. Your faithfulness will open the door for him. At first, Rebecca wrestled with this. Why should I stay in a marriage that feels empty? Why should I keep loving someone who doesn't care about my faith? But over time, she realized that God wasn't asking her to remain in her marriage just for her own sake. God was calling her to stay because her persistence in love and faith was the key to unlocking her husband's salvation. So she stayed. She continued praying, loving, and serving in faith, even when it seemed like nothing was changing. Years passed. It wasn't easy. There were days when Rebecca felt like giving up. She saw other people's marriages flourishing while hers felt stagnant. But through it all, Rebecca remained faithful, believing that God was at work in ways she couldn't see. Then, one day, her husband came to her with tears in his eyes and said, "I've been watching you all these years. Your faith, your love, it's made me believe. I want to know Christ like you do." That moment of breakthrough came not because Rebecca had forced the situation or demanded change. It came because she had obeyed God's call to stay, even when it was hard, and had trusted that God was working through her faithfulness. Her willingness to remain in a difficult place wasn't just a testament to her own strength, it was the key to her husband's salvation. Rebecca's story is just one example of how God works through our struggles for a greater purpose. Many of us can relate to feeling stuck in a difficult situation where we're not seeing immediate results. But God uses these very moments to refine us, teach us patience, and often to bring someone else into his fold. It's not always easy to see the impact of our obedience, but when we stay, God is at work. Our faithfulness in the hardest places becomes a powerful witness of God's grace, not just for us, but for those around us who need to experience his love. The truth is, we may never fully understand why God calls us to endure certain hardships, but we can trust that he has a plan that is bigger than our own comfort and personal desires. God's invitation to remain in difficult places for someone else's salvation is an invitation to participate in his redemptive work on a scale far greater than we can imagine. And while the journey may be long and painful, the transformation that happens in us and through us is worth it. Just like Rebecca, we may not see the results right away, but our faithfulness can open the door to life-changing encounters with God for others. Sometimes, our greatest act of obedience is simply staying. I'd love to hear from you. Are you currently in a hard place where God may be calling you to stay for the sake of someone else's salvation? Maybe it's a relationship, a work situation, or even a personal struggle that feels never-ending. How do you navigate those moments when staying seems impossible? Drop a comment below, share your story, or ask any questions you might have. I'm here to connect with you, and if this video has encouraged you, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you can keep receiving more videos like this one. Videos that bring biblical wisdom to help you grow in faith and trust God through every season. Stay tuned, because in our next video, we're going to dive deeper into how to see God's hand at work in the most painful circumstances. You won't want to miss it. As we reflect on the idea of staying in hard places for the sake of someone else's salvation, it's important to recognize the transformation that happens not just in the person we're called to help, but also in ourselves. There's something profoundly powerful about remaining faithful in the midst of hardship, something that shifts our perspective on both God's work and our own purpose. Let me share a personal story that deeply illustrates this truth. A few years ago, I was in a situation that seemed impossible. I was facing a difficult relationship where I felt underappreciated and misunderstood. It was a constant struggle, and I felt like I was giving more than I was receiving. There were moments when I thought, why am I still here? Why am I enduring this? I even prayed for God to take me out of the situation, to rescue me from the pain. But in that quiet place, God spoke to my heart, reminding me that this hardship wasn't just about me, it was about something greater. He called me to stay, not for my own comfort or relief, but for the redemption of the person I was struggling with. This wasn't easy. I had to choose to love, serve, and pray without knowing if or when things would change. There were days when I wanted to walk away, when I couldn't see any fruit from my faithfulness. But as I remained faithful, something shifted inside me. I began to see God's hand at work in ways I'd never imagined. The relationship didn't instantly change, but I found myself growing in patience, compassion, and grace. in a way I never would have if I had left. Months later, I began to see small signs of breakthrough. The person I was struggling with started to open up, began to share their heart, and slowly started to acknowledge the love I had shown them. It wasn't an instant transformation, but it was progress. I saw that my willingness to stay, to endure in faith, was softening their heart and allowing them to see Christ's love in action. And in that moment, I realized something profound. My obedience to stay, my willingness to endure for the sake of someone else's growth, was shaping me into the person God was calling me to be. This experience was a reminder that our obedience in hard places doesn't just impact the person we're praying for, it transforms us. God uses these moments to refine our character, to teach us to love without expecting anything in return, and to trust that He is always working, even when we can't see it. And sometimes, the greatest transformation happens not in the external circumstances, but in our own hearts, as we learn to trust God more fully. When we stay, we're not just enduring, we're actively participating in God's redemptive plan. The lives of those we're called to help may be forever changed, but so will ours. The person who stays in the hard place, trusting God in the midst of pain, emerges stronger, deeper in faith, and more in tune with God's purposes. The fruit may not always be immediate, and the struggle may seem overwhelming, but the power of staying is undeniable. Through our endurance, God brings about a greater work in both us and those around us, shaping our hearts and their hearts for His kingdom. This is the true power of staying in hard places. We don't just survive them, we thrive in them. And through our obedience, God does immeasurably more than we could ever ask or imagine. So if you find yourself in a difficult place today, know that God sees you, He knows your pain, and He is using your faithfulness in ways you may never fully understand. Trust that He is working, and that your willingness to stay is part of His beautiful redemptive story. As we close, it's important to remember that God's plan for us often unfolds in ways we least expect. Staying in a difficult place for the sake of someone else's salvation may not feel like a victory in the moment, but it is a powerful act of obedience that God honors. Through the stories of Joseph, Paul, and even modern-day examples like Rebecca, we see that our hardships are never wasted. They are tools that God uses to bring about His greater purposes. What we may see as a trial is often a divine opportunity for transformation, not just in us, but in the lives of others. The truth is, the hard places we find ourselves in can become sacred ground where God works miracles. He can use our struggles to reach people we may never have imagined, and our obedience to stay in the hardest seasons can lead to breakthrough, healing, and salvation for others. This doesn't mean the journey will be easy. It will require faith, patience, and trust in God's timing. But we can be assured that He is with us every step of the way, and He will never leave us or forsake us. So if you find yourself in a difficult place right now, I want to encourage you to stay. Stay in faith, stay in trust, stay in love, even when it seems impossible. God is working in ways you may not yet see, and your willingness to endure may be the key to unlocking someone else's salvation. Let this truth comfort you. Your pain is never in vain. God is using it, shaping it, and ultimately using you as part of His redemptive work in this world. As we leave today, let the words of Romans 8:28 echo in your heart. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. Even when the road is difficult, God is at work. Even in the moments of pain, He is using you for His greater plan. Trust that He is faithful and that He will see you through, using your hardship for His glory and the salvation of others. Father, I come before you today with a heart full of gratitude and trust in your plan. For those who are struggling, who find themselves in hard places and wonder why they must stay, I ask that you would fill them with your peace. I pray for those who are enduring pain for the sake of someone else's salvation. Give them the strength to keep going, even when they can't see the end of the journey. Lord, remind them that their suffering is never in vain, and that you are using it for something far greater than they can imagine. Give them eyes to see your hand at work, even in the hardest seasons, and help them to trust that you are always present, even when the road is rough. I pray for endurance, for faith that doesn't waver, and for hearts that remain tender and full of love, even in the face of hardship. I ask that you would protect them from discouragement and fill them with a deep sense of purpose, knowing that their obedience is part of your grand plan of redemption. Lord, for those who feel like giving up, I ask for a fresh outpouring of your grace. Strengthen their resolve and help them to know that you are with them in every step of the way. Surround them with people who will encourage them and remind them of your faithfulness. And as they stay, as they endure, may they experience your presence in a deeper way and witness the miracle of transformation in the lives of those around them. In Jesus' name, amen. If this message has spoken to you today, I encourage you to take a moment and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who might be in a hard place right now. We never know how our words or actions can impact someone else's journey. Also, I'd love to hear your story. How is God calling you to stay in a difficult place for someone else's salvation? Drop a comment below, share your thoughts, or ask any questions you might have. And don't forget to stay tuned for next week's video, where we'll dive deeper into how to trust God when you can't see the end of the road. You won't want to miss it.